So we'll review the lab that you worked on yesterday, the Tartel lab. I have a version of the lab that is that should be exactly the same as what you looked at when you first cloned the lab. So I haven't added anything. The HTML should be exactly the same. The JavaScript is the same, and our DB contains a few toys. All right, so let's start by opening up our front end, and open up in the wrong tab. Here we go. Cool. So we have our starting point here, which is just our little header, and then this button to add a new toy. First up, this this button here that we get that toggles our toy form. Does anybody have any questions about how this was done for us? So we hide and show the toy form. Are there any questions about how this is done here?
Could you explain it a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so let's walk through this. If we let's start with our button. So we got our button somewhere in here. Add a new toy, right? This is our button right here. That's what we're selecting. So our new toy button is what we are grabbing here in our event listener. So we're actually, first of all, we're adding this like DOM content loaded event listener just to kind of clean up the code a little bit and not have that confuse us. We already have the defer tag here. So let's get rid of this DOM content loaded. I think maybe I added this later on. So, okay, so let's focus on the event listener that we built for this toggling the form. So we are adding an event listener to our add button, which we grabbed up here. It is a click event listener, so whenever we click on that button, we do something. And what we do is we, first of all, we flip this Boolean up here that we called add toy. This is when we first load the page, this is set to false. What we do here is we take the previous value and just reverse it, right? So if it was false previously, we flip it to true and the other way around. This is what like would be considered like a toggle. And then we have our if statement that just checks if this is true or false, depending on if we have it set to true or false. If this is true, we're going to change the style of our toy form. In our toy form, we selected up here. This is our container right here that contains our form. So we're taking our toy form, we're changing the style, in particular this display property. We're changing it to block. And if this is this Boolean here is false, we are changing the display property to none. Changing a display property from block to none means that we are either showing or hiding a certain element on our page. We can also try this out with some other elements. So if we take a look at our header here, if we change our display to none, it makes our header disappear. Right, so this display none essentially like removes something from the page, and we can toggle that. So all we're doing here is we're toggling this property, and that shows and hides our form for us. Any questions about that? Okay. Cool. So I'm gonna just like while we're coding this out, I'm gonna try to like give our file a little bit more structure than maybe what we've done previously, and just to make it a little bit clearer, like what kinds of functions are we writing and why are we writing them. You can structure your JavaScript file in pretty much any way you like, and I know that that can be a burden, but it can also be a blessing because you can structure it however it makes sense to you. So I'm gonna separate out my functions into, I'll probably have some like listeners. So I'm going to build like a listener section. I'll probably have something that will deal with my event handlers. So any function that I will call when on like a event listener, when an event listener is triggered. And then we can have a section for anything that has to do with our API. So any kind of like fetches that we have. So let's build like a fetches section. And then lastly, we might want to have like a section for any kind of DOM manipulation. And this is not a science. We're just going to try to put a little bit more structure, build a little bit more structure around our JavaScript file. This is just one way of structuring it. One other way that I could think of is by functionality. So since we're supposed to do a couple of things, we have a couple of tasks. So like we're supposed to fetch all of the toys, right? We're supposed to add functionality to create a new toy, and then we have this toggle functionality. One other way that you could structure your file is by those pieces of functionality. So you'd have like a section that's called toggle, and then we'd have another section that's called like adding toy and like fetching all toys or something like that. This would be another way that you could structure this. I'll leave this down here if you want to take a look at that. So whichever one you prefer, go for that. All right, so we have our event listener here, and let's wrap this in a function, and we'll call this listen to toggle button. Awesome. So listen to toggle button, we need to call this. I'm just going to go ahead and call my functions at the top so that I can see like all of my function calls here. We'll call this function calls. And then my first listener is going to go under my listener section. And I could separate this out too. I can take some of this and maybe put it in the like DOM manipulation section. But we're just going to keep this for now. And if we want to do more refactoring later on, we can do that. The reason that I can make this function call at the top, remember, is because I'm using a function declaration. If I were to turn this into a function expression, like for example, using an arrow function, we would not be able to call this function at the top. If this looked like this, we would run into an error. So jump over to our console here, and we can see the error here, listen to toggle button cannot be accessed before initialization. Only function declarations are hoisted in that way that we can use them before they are declared in our code when it comes to functions. Okay, any questions here so far about our structure, about our toggle button? Okay, let's make this like another section. All right. So let's start at the beginning. If we take a look at our README file, we can see that our first task here, first of all, we should probably start our server, right? Hopefully we have this installed already, and then we can start our server that will listen to our db.json file. So let's go ahead and do this. Check if our server is running. You can always go to localhost 3000, and then here, right here, if you click on this link, it will send us to the to our toys endpoint. All right. Now, first thing we want to do is we want to fetch all of our toys. So let's see. We want to add our toys to our toy collection div. And in order to do that, obviously, we need to fetch all of them. So let's jump back to our JavaScript. So we're going to need some kind of functionality that will make a fetch request, right? We don't need, do we need any kind of event listener here for fetching all of our toys? Nathan's shaking his head, yeah. We don't. We're really just like, we're going to be calling this function whenever our page loads. So we don't need any kind of event listener. If we didn't have our defer tag in our script right here, we would need a DOM content loaded event listener for everything. But in this case, to fetch our toys, we don't need anything like that. So let's create a new function. Let's call this fetch get toys. Awesome. And this is going to be a fetch request. Someone want to help me write this fetch request to get all of our toys?
Do fetch. And it's http:// localhost 3000. Yeah, perfect.
Cool.
Then
I just copied. Yeah.
And then let's just do resp arrow resp.json.
All right.
And then .then. And then call like render toy card on the result.
Okay. Oh, this is actually an interesting point that you bring up. So you saying something like this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you've seen this before, and I'm sure you have here and there in some of the labs, this is a short form for writing this. So if we have our like data, render toy card, and we pass in our data. This right here is the same thing as this line right here. All we do, this is actually similar, or the same thing happens as when we have an event listener. Remember when we have an event listener, let's actually refactor this real quick because then we can kind of demonstrate how that works. So let's take our code right here and put this in a function. We'll call this toggle toy, or let's do handle form toggle. Awesome. So this is going to go in our handlers, handle form toggle, and we're going to throw our code in here that we just copied. Okay, and we have our variables outside here so we can access those. So a similar thing is happening right here when we pass in this handle form toggle. Remember that we always get this event for free, right? So we could pass an event here. We could use that here if we wanted to look at the event target or something like that. We could also write this like so. We get our event here and we pass it in right here. Those two are equivalent, right? So what happens here, if we don't specifically like turn this into an arrow function and pass in our event, is our event gets passed in automatically. We don't need to specify that it needs to get passed in. And then the same thing happens down here when we have our then. We receive our data, we call our render toy card, and we pass in that data that we receive. This is the short form of that same thing. Oops. So this is the short form of this right here. It's really just syntactic sugar. If this doesn't quite make sense to you, feel free to just kind of do it this way. But if you see this somewhere, that is what's going on. Our data is automatically passed into our like render toy card function right here. Are there any questions about that?
Any reason you would choose one format over the other? Do you potentially have other reasons to do line 29 because you wanted to call, I guess, several functions at once?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe?
If you want to do more than just call this one function, absolutely, you'd probably want to split it off like this. You might even want to like turn this, like add some curly brackets so that you have a little bit more space. So if we want to like, do something else here, we can do that. With this syntax, we cannot. This is just like we pass in the function that gets the argument automatically, and that's it. So if you need to do more work, you definitely don't want to use this syntax. Yeah, great point.
Okay. Do you need the parentheses on data on line 29 and parentheses around rest on 28?
You do not. This is optional. If you just have one argument, you do not need the parentheses. My auto formatter here puts those in for me, but once you have more than one argument, if you had like another argument here, you would actually need the parentheses, but with just one, it's not necessary. Okay, so we now want to, what do we want to do? Render the toy card. So here we get like a bunch of toys, right? This is like multiple toys that we get. And if we get like multiple toys, maybe we can, let's call this like render toy cards because it will be multiple. And then this would be in our, probably in our DOM manipulation section here. So let's create another function here, call this render toys, render toy cards. And we pass in our toys here to our render toy cards. Let's make this a little shorter again. Awesome. I'm gonna leave the syntax here, but again, feel free to like use this syntax instead if you prefer that. So one other reason that you might want to do it one way or the other way is to be more explicit, right? So using a bunch of short forms is great if you understand them, but they can also make your code a little bit less readable. In this case, it might not be obvious to everyone that you are passing in a variable here that you'll get returned from your then. So it's not obvious, always super obvious when you're using these short forms what exactly you're trying to do. So there, you should always try to strike a balance between readability and conciseness. Okay, so let's first of all like console log our toys just to make sure that they got there successfully. And they did not because we are not calling a function. Let's do that up here. Cool. All right, so we're console logging our toys here in our render toy cards function. And this seems to be exactly what we're looking for. All right, so if we want to render a bunch of toys in our README file, we have some guidance on what our toy card should look like, right? So this right here should be one of our toy cards. It is contains a couple of classes so that it's formatted in a certain way. And so I'm just going to kind of grab this and copy everything because otherwise what I would have to do and what we could also do is create each one of our elements. But I'm going to create, I'm going to use inner HTML to kind of append this HTML code so I don't have to do that all manually. So let's create another function here. We'll call this render toy card. So this is like a single toy card, right? And then what I want to return here is this HTML that I just copied from my README. And we'll just kind of leave it like this for now, and we'll fill this out in just a second. So I want to take this render toy card, and because I have multiple toys, I probably, if I have an array of something, I probably want to iterate over those. So I'm going to take my toys, and then for each one of my toys, for each, I get one single toy, and I'm going to call my render toy card function that returns the string with the new toy card. Now, obviously, I have to do something like I have to somehow append this to the page as well. And I'm actually going to write another function for that because later on, I know that we need to create a new toy and append that to the page as well. So I'm going to create a function that does just like taking the container, the inner HTML of the container and appending something new to it. So let's call this like append toy. I'm just trying to make my application a little bit more reusable at this point. So I would like to find my toy container, which is right here, toy collection. So since I'm like creating my main variables that I'm going to reuse up here, let's do that with our toy container as well. Document, query selector, and this is an ID, I believe. Awesome. So this is our toy container now, and we can take that to change our inner HTML and add our new toy to it. So we have to do a little bit of refactoring here because we're not going to call our render toy card here anymore, but we're going to call our append toy. So let's kind of follow this, what's going on. But first of all, let's see if we get something. Yeah, so we get all of our toys, but they're all the same right now because we haven't edited this. But essentially what's going on, we are first fetching all of our toys. We're calling our render toy cards function that passes along all of our toys. This is an array of toy objects. In our render toy cards function, all we're doing is we're iterating over our toys, and for each toy that we have, we call our append toy function. Our append toy function takes our toy container, the inner HTML of it, and appends this new toy that we create from our render toy card function right here. This is where we return the string with this toy card. And now all we have to do in here is change a few things like our name, our toy name, change our likes, toy.likes, I believe, and then here our image URL as well. All right, let's try that out. Awesome. So we get like a whole bunch of different toys now. Any questions about like how we split up our functions, any of the functionality that we've built so far?
Just side question related to inner HTML in this case. Because we're going to be passing in this data from a form, wouldn't we want to use like inner HTML might possibly be dangerous because somebody could inject HTML into the thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
That's true. Yeah, so that's what I mentioned a little while ago about inner HTML being, you know, a little peculiar. This is, we can do, I have a small cross-site scripting lecture. We can maybe do that next week. I don't want you to worry about this too much right now. If you want to use this in the code challenge, please do. This is an easy way to append some data to your page. But we can talk a little bit more about the security concerns around inner HTML for sure. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions here about the structure or like how we separated out our code? Is that all making sense? Okay. All right, let's move on to, so this was our first task. We finished that, starting to look good. Let's move on to the next one. We finished fetching all of our toys. We added the toy info to the card. So the next task here is being able to add a new toy, which would be coming from our toy form. So if we open up our toy form here, we're supposed to type in the toy's name and then the image URL. Our README even tells us like what kind of request we're going to make. So I'm actually going to copy this code. This is super helpful to me. Tells me what my headers are supposed to be, the body and everything. And I'm going to jump back to my JavaScript file, and I am going to just add that like as a comment down here so that I can keep this around for a little bit. Okay, so in order to add a new toy, as a user, I'm going to like type something in here and I'm going to hit my button right here. What do I need to do in order to hook up this toy form?
You need an event listener for a submit.
Exactly. I need to listen to my form submit. So let's create another function here. Function listen to form submit. And let's make sure that we call that up here before I forget that again. And it means we want to add an event listener to our form. Again, remember that we want, whenever we have a form submit, we always want to attach the event listener to submit event listener to our entire form. So we need to grab our add toy form that we have up here, and let's go ahead and do that. Toy form, and I'll copy the class. And then if we're using query selector, make sure that you get the dot and our hashtag right based on if it's a class or an ID. All right, so now we have our toy form. Oh, this is called the same. What was this container? It's called this toy form container. That makes a little more sense. So let's change that up. Okay, so we have our toy form now, and we want to attach an event listener to it. Because this is a form, this is going to be a submit event listener. And then we have our callback function here. We'll call this handle toy, let's say form submit. If you are not sure what things are supposed to be called, the way that we're splitting this up right now, I'm actually kind of being lazy in the way that I'm naming my functions. I am just being specific as to like what each function does. So this is like a listener, right? Listen to form submit, and then I am calling this a handler. So I'm saying handle, and then I'm actually using the same name here, like handle form submit. Same up here, almost. Actually, let's change this so that we can be consistent. So I'm gonna name. Yeah, that's good. So I'm going to just name my listeners and my handlers in a similar way. That way I don't have to think about it too much. So we now have this like handle form submit. Let's write a function for that. I guess we should probably put that down here. You can get into like crazy detail about where to put your functions and what exactly to call them. There's no reason that you should overthink this if it's functional, that like if the functionality of the application is right, that should be enough. You can always refactor stuff later. So if you're not happy with the way that you call the function, like you named a function, you can change that later on. Okay, so handle form submit. Let's make sure we pass in our event here, because what do we always need to do with a form?
Prevent the default behavior.
Prevent the default. Exactly. Perfect. And let's just see if we are successfully submitting that form without a refresh of our page. If we hit create a new toy, we can see that we're console logging something down here. So that's successful. Awesome. So what do we need to do now after our form has been submitted? What are a couple of things that we need to do?
You want to update the backend and the front end with the form data.
Yep. Update backend, update front end. And before we do any of that, we need to get our form like values, right? Awesome. So let's start with that. Let's grab our form values. And let's jump back to our HTML real quick to take a look at our input fields. It looks like our input fields have a name attribute, so we can use that in order to grab our values. So let's create a new variable here. We'll call this name input. And then we can, does someone remember how I grab the input field from my event target?
E.target.name. As long as you've got the name variable on it.
Yep. So e.target.name, because we called this name, for the next one is going to be e.target.image, because the name attribute here has the value of image. So do the same for our image. And again, the reason that I'm splitting this up, and we actually haven't really gotten much of a chance to get to this, the past few lectures, but I'm going to show you right now like why I want to split these up into separate variables. Let's call this name and image. Because whenever a user is submitting my form, what I probably want to do at the end is go ahead and like clear the form, right? I don't want the user to be able to see what they typed in after they submit. So at the very end somewhere, I want to take my name input and my image input, and I want to change their values to just be an empty string. So the only reason that I can do this here is because I split my grabbing my inputs and sorry, this should be dot value. Wasn't quite finished with that. Splitting up my like getting my input fields and then getting the values out of those input fields so that I can reset my form later on. So what that looks like is like this. If I type something in here and hit create a new toy, it removes the input values here from my form. So that's just like nice, you know, functionality for the user. If we wanted to, if we didn't care about clearing the form, we could just go ahead and you know, roll these constants into one or into like two variables instead of four. All right, so we have grabbed our values from our form. Now what we want to do is we want to update our front end and our back end. How do we update our back end?
Make a post request.
Yes, we need to make a post request. All right, so since we have our like fetches in a separate section, let's create a new function here. We'll call this fetch post toy. This is for a new toy. And let's create this function down here. And what we're going to need to pass along is the new toy that we want to create. We just grabbed that from our input, from our inputs here from our page. So let's construct a new toy here. Call this new toy. And let's double check with our backend what our structure looks like. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this actually. And set this equal to my new toy. And then I'm going to replace, I'm going to get rid of my ID because I know that the backend deals with that. And I'm going to replace my name string here with the name that I grabbed from my input field, and my image, I'm going to do the same thing. And then we probably want to start at just like 0 likes for if we add a new toy. That makes a lot of sense to me. And now we have this new toy object that we can pass along to our fetch post toy function that deals with updating the backend. So let's grab this comment, put that in here. Question?
No, I just need to think about like adding the like that, setting that at 0. Because I kept seeing it on the fine. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll figure that out, but never got around to thinking about how to figure it out. And setting it when you're adding to the database makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, just this is like common thing that you might do when you have like a counter or something. You just kind of start out at 0 and then you don't really have to worry about the rest. Okay, let's give this like, let's make this a to-do. By the way, one thing that you can also do like while you're coding or while you're in the code challenge or like anytime is add these little comments that are like little to-dos that you still have to do. So if you think about it in the moment, if you write out your plan for what you need to do, just add like a string of to-do beforehand, and then later on you can just like find all of your to-dos and kind of go through them and and finish them up as you go. So that you can like focus on one thing, but you can take down notes for something else and worry about that later. Okay, fetch post toy. We need to make a post request to our backend. And this is also like a to-do that we have to do. We'll be doing right now. So let's make a fetch request, and it's going to be a fetch post request. What do we need to do in order to make a fetch post request?
need the URL that you're sending the post request to, and then you also have to define the post request, like the body of it.
Yeah, exactly. We need to make sure that we pass in our method, our headers, and our body. First of all, like what URL do I need to make this request to?
/toys.
Yes, /toys. So same one as when we're fetching all of our toys, because we're creating a new toy here. And we'll also pass in our options that we will fill out now. So in our options, because this is a post request, we need to specify our method. And this will be post. Cool. And then we're gonna need our body, right? We don't know exactly what that's gonna be yet. So let's leave that out. Actually, we do exactly know what that's gonna be because we already passed this in here. So I guess let's just finish that. All right, so we have our new toy that we created previously, right here, this object. And we need to make sure, because we can only send strings along, that we stringify this new toy object in order to pass that to our database. What about, what else do we need here? What other key do we need here?
Something about the application /JSON, but I don't quite remember the something format.
Yeah, so if we don't remember,
Headers.
right? The headers. So if we don't remember, let's look this up, right? This is totally fine to look these things up. We could probably use any of these. I know that we've gone through most of them already. Let's take a look at like this one here. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, this looks a little convoluted in my opinion. Let's go to our official documentation. It's always a safe bet. So if we search for post here, because this is all for everything with fetch, we can see that we have an example here. And sometimes like this example looks pretty big, but we can try to like break it apart. Also, they're using async functionality, which we haven't dealt with, or with the async keyword, which we haven't dealt with. Let's see if there's another example. Oh, there's another example down here. This is super simple. This is exactly what we want to do. We could literally copy all of this and just kind of use it as we go. So let's take this with us and let's paste that in here. And let's just kind of dissect this, right? So it looks like they are making a post request. It looks like they have some headers and a body. They're resolving the response. This is exactly what we need to do. This is like this kind of structure. If you're sending JSON data, it's always going to be the same. This is, you know, you're not going to write anything. You're not going to have to get creative here. This is always going to be that same structure. We don't really care about the catching the error right now, but everything else is actually exactly what we want to do. The only thing that we're doing a little differently here is we're taking this options object and we're putting it in a different variable. So if we were to write this out like we did previously, then it would look something like this. So now this is looking pretty familiar to what we've done. Let's remove this put because we know we want to make a post. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So we can take this and we can either modify this up here or modify what we've written so far. So the only piece that we are missing here was our headers. That points to an object with the content type of application JSON to tell our backend what information we're sending to it. And at this point, we are pretty much, yeah, go for it.
For the body JSON stringified data, does that not matter what the variable inside stringify is, or should it not be new toy?
Or should it be what? What was the
On
last
new toy on line 67.
Yeah. So this is just what I copied from over here, just to give me like a reference as to like what I need to do. But absolutely, this should be like new toy in this case. I'm going to get rid of this. I just left that here for a reference. One other thing I can copy if I want to. so that I don't have to write it out, is this these chain then statements for my fetch, because I know I'm going to need to do that. So let's grab those and let's get rid of what we copied. And this is looking pretty good. So all we did here is we figured out that we need to add our headers. And we added those to our options, and then we added our then already, which we could have written out ourselves as well, but this is pretty much what we want to do anyway. So, all right, let's try this out. If we jump back to our toy form here, and let's refresh our page, and let's add a new toy. Hit submit, and we get the console log. We don't get anything on the page, but if we take a look at our backend, we can see that we've successfully submitted a new toy. So this looks like this is working just fine. We got our console log for our success with the data that comes back. Awesome. So now all we have to do is our last part, our to do here, which is update the front end. We are done with this. And we now want to update our front end. Let's bring this in here. If we bring this in here and we wait for our response from our backend, what kind of what's that called? How are we rendering our data?
Pessimistically?
Pessimistically, exactly. We are waiting for the response from the server in order to like render it right then when that information comes back. We are if we did it optimistically, we wouldn't care about what the server sends us back. Okay, so let's do this pessimistically. And all we want to do is we want to essentially create a new toy cart, right, and append it to our page. It sounds like something that we've already done before, right? So the way that we've written our code earlier was by creating this extra function that's called append toy that takes a toy container and appends something to the end. All we need to do here is call this function, append toy. So in here, call this function, pass in our data. Let's call this like toy, or maybe we want to call this new toy, right? And that should take care of everything. If we get rid of our console log, let's try this out. Okay, so a new toy, something, we are clearing our form, and we have our new toy on the front end as well as the back end. That looks great. So we're reusing our functions here, which is pretty cool. And we don't have to do a lot of work there to get that up and running.
Minor aside that we don't need to get into if it's going to take too long, but right now we're always appending to the end, which makes sense for the JSON database because that's where your new numbers are. But if you wanted to flip how they were displayed on the screen so that the new thing was always first, would you just change the order of your for each so it looped downward?
Oh, so if you wanted to actually like get this array back from the backend, but flip the order.
Yeah, or even just display if they're adding a new thing, just add that one new thing to the front, even if it's out of order from everything else.
Okay. Let's see. So we're doing. How do we add something to the front? I don't think we can do like a minus equal or anything like that. I can think of how to do it if you do like a, you can do something like instead of append, you can do prepend. So if you did have a node, we would be able to easily do that. I don't know exactly how easy that is with inner HTML. Let's see. Maybe we can find something online.
Yeah, there's an MDN on.
What's that? There's something about that?
There's parent node.prepend, and it says method inserts a set of node objects or DOM string objects before the first child of the parent node.
Yeah, so we can use prepend. but we'd actually have to create like some actual nodes for that. So we could do that, but I think the easiest thing would be to use prepend. We're not gonna. I don't think we're gonna get into that too much right
Sure.
now, but
Fair enough. Yeah.
that would be one way to figure that out.
Okay.
Cool. All right, let me remove like my new toys because we're getting these errors here. All right, looks good. So now we have fulfilled the next part here, adding a new toy. That is, we're almost done. We're almost finished. The last part is increasing our toy likes, and then we will be done. So let's jump back here. We can also get rid of this now. We've used all of this. We could have actually just kind of copied this here. Our README told us exactly what our body and our headers are supposed to look like. But we can also find this on the internet like we did. A little bit more reliable that way. Okay. So let's do the last part, which is the like button. So whenever we hit one of our like buttons, we want to increase our likes. What do we need to do first in order to hook that up?
Listen for a like click.
Event listener.
Yeah, exactly. Do I want to attach a listener to each one of my buttons?
Now you want to try to use the container, and then you can choose which target that you actually clicked on.
Yep, exactly. I want to use event delegation. So let's call this listen to like button clicks. This is like we're listening to all of them. Let's make sure we call this function up here. Maybe I'm going to move this up. Makes a little more sense to me. Okay. So you can also always, with this kind of stuff, when you're creating these functions or these function calls, you can also use space in order to show your, whoever's reading the code that you are kind of like putting certain pieces of code together. So let's say I added a little bit of space here between our fetch get toys and these listen functions. The listeners here, or the calls for the listen functions, to like in my mind kind of belong together. So it might make sense to add a little bit of space here. Maybe you don't really care about that. Just something to keep in mind if you're trying to like make your code a little bit more readable.
Could we, as a refactor later, put all the event listeners into one function, since they're all kind of independent anyways?
Sure. Like have like a function like attach event listeners or something like that?
Yeah, and then lines like 18, 22, 20, whatever the next one would all go inside of that.
Oh, I see. Yeah, you could do that. See, I'm not seeing a particularly good reason why we might want to do that in that case, but there's actually one thing that I want to talk about at the end. Let me write this down so we don't forget, which is ifs. So let's make this like a to-do, which what that does is it makes sure that we don't have our variables all in the global scope. So maybe that will like partially answer your question, Brad, but we'll get to that later on. So let's continue with our listen to like button clicks. And what we want to do is we want to listen to all of the clicks that are within our toy collection container, because that contains all of our toys. So I believe we already have a variable for that. So this is, right here, a toy container. So on that container, we're going to add an event listener and our callback function. And I guess we could create a handler here handle like button clicks. All right, so that we can be a little consistent. I'll put this at the top so that they're together, so we can code this out a little more easily. Okay, so listen to like button clicks. We'll take in an event. We're going to need that event because we need to make sure that that we can figure out what the target was. And let's just start by throwing a debugger in here. And if we click on one of our like buttons, we can see in our console that our event target is our button right here. With event delegation, something that we always want to do is we want to make sure that we filter out only the buttons in this case that we want to be clickable. So we need some kind of if statement here to check. Let's check for the tag name, right? Event target tag name equals button. And we'll use that as an if statement to make sure that we are grabbing the correct element. Awesome. Let's throw a console log in here, and we'll just log our event target. And then we can just kind of try see if this is our if statement is working correctly. If we click on anything here like our image or the title, nothing happens. But if we click on one of our like buttons, that actually logs the like button right here. Okay, so what's the next thing that we need to do?
Update this backend side.
Yeah, update the backend. Awesome. And then whenever we have like an update the backend, we usually also have an update the front end, right? Because we have like a single page application. Awesome. All right, so in order to update our backend, we need some kind of fetch request, right? So let's create a fetch. We'll call this fetch patch, right? This is going to be a patch likes. Okay, and let's create this down here. Fetch patch likes, and let's start by writing our patch request. We can kind of make our lives a little easier and copy what we did previously with our post, because this is going to be very similar. Instead of a post, it's going to be a patch though. And instead of posting or patching to /toys, we need to make sure that we post this to our toys/ID. So we need some kind of ID here, toy ID, that we don't have yet, but we will get in just a second. And let's just like console log our toy. We'll call this updated toy. Okay, so let's work our way back. The fetch request is pretty much complete, but we need some more information, which is, first of all, we need the toy that we want to update, like the actual body. We also need the toy ID. Let's call this updated toy. So we know that these two things we're going to need to pass into this function somehow. So let's pass this in as if we had it, updated toy. And then let's jump back to where we're calling this function, which is up here. And we're going to need to pass these things in somehow. So we have to make sure that we find them first, right? So let's throw a debugger in here again and see how we can get that information. If we hit our like button here, we need the toy ID and like whatever we want to update. It doesn't have to be the entire toy, but it could just be, in our case, all we want to update is our likes number here. So how do we get the toy ID? Let's start with that.
It can come from the target parent element ID.
Yeah, let's take a look at the parent element. That is our card. It looks like we don't have an ID here anywhere for the toy. What else do we need to do?
Change the CSS to include the ID would be an easy way to do it.
Yeah, change our HTML where we're rendering the toy right here. Exactly, that would be the easiest thing to do. So what we want to change is we want to add the actual ID of the toy so that we can then later on grab that from our HTML. We can do that. We can put something on our card here. We're just gonna kind of make our lives a little easier and put this directly on the button. Create a data ID attribute and set that equal to our toy.id. Awesome. So now let's play this and hit our like button again. And we can now look at our event target. And we can see that we have this data attribute on there. You can get that by saying dataset, which will get us all of our data attributes, and then .id will get us the actual ID of the toy. All right, let's scroll back up. So right here, we wanted to create a variable called toy ID that is going to equal to event.target.dataset.id. And then somehow we need another variable here for our updated toy, right? That is going to be an object because, it might not be the entire toy that we're updating, but what we want to update is we want to update our likes. So this is going to be an object with an attribute of likes and some kind of number of 5 or something like that. Actually, let me take that back because I feel like we have to do this request in a certain way, right? Oh, this is right, actually. So it's an object with a string of likes and then, okay. So we're doing the right thing here. All right, so how do we get these likes? How do we get this number right here? That could be anything. Like this is the actual likes for one of our toys. How do we get that?
The way Nathan and I figured out last night was to just grab what's on the screen and then add 1 to it.
Exactly. Let's do that. So how do we get to, we have our event target. How do we get to these likes right here?
We can use the element, the parent element, and then we can see the tag for,
Yep.
We have the p tag with the 8 likes, and we can take it from here.
Exactly. So we can say .parent element, query selector, and then select the p tag, right? That will give us our likes. We could also say event.target say sibling, previous sibling element, which will get us the previous sibling of what we're currently targeting. That will also give us our p tag. We can roll with either one, whichever one you prefer. Let's get this one here, and we need to make sure that we get the text content because we want to grab that number of likes. So let's create another variable here. Let's do just this, and we'll create a variable called likes element. Okay. So now from this element, from the text content, how do we actually get this number of 8?
You can do a parsing.
Oh, yeah. So you mean we just call a parsint on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's try that out. So this actually works because of the way that parseInt works. It finds the first number it can find, I think, and then it just kind of strips everything else and turns it into a number. If you don't really feel that comfortable with it, which I would understand, because you're kind of turning a string into with other stuff in it into a number. One other thing that you could do here is you can take this text content, we can split this by spaces, and then we get like an array with each one of our items. And then the first one here will be our number. And then we can turn that into a number by doing parse int or with our unary plus. Either one will work. Again, there are like so many different ways that you can actually get to the same result. Just pick the one that you feel most comfortable with. Okay, let me grab some of this. And then instead of this, we have our likes element. Okay, so we're pretty much doing the same thing that we did in our console here. That gives us our current, like, let's do current num likes. Okay, and then we probably want to have some kind of variable that's like our new likes, new num likes, which is our current num likes plus 1. Just adding 1 to it. And at this point, we can use this new likes number and replace our likes for our updated toy right here that we're passing into our patch function that makes our patch request with those updated toys, with those updated likes. Sorry. All right, let's try this out. I hit the like button. And then I refresh my page, and now Woody has 9. Do it again, refresh my page, we got 10. So we've successfully updated this on the backend. So our backend fetch, which was right here, is successfully updating everything. Let's walk through this one more time. We're passing in our toy ID, we're passing in our updated toy, which is just an object of likes with the key of likes and the value of the new likes number. And then we're making a patch. We're making sure that our backend knows what we're sending. We're stringifying our object here. For our body, we're making our fetch request with our options to/toy/ID. This is where we're using our ID. And then at this point, we're just console logging our data here with the updated toy. We might not even want to do anything with that here. We might want to do like an optimistic updating of our likes here. It kind of depends on what you want to go for. But yeah, let's do our front end update. Any questions here so far about the backend stuff or grabbing the likes that we've done?
Can you go about
Go.
the, sorry, Brad, for getting the toy ID within the fetch for the patch?
Yeah, how we did that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we
Oh, I
did
see.
that with 2 steps, which the first one is adding this data ID attribute to our button itself, which we know that our button will always be our event target whenever we click on one of these like buttons. So we have like easy access to these attributes from this button. And we're using this data-ID attribute to set it equal to our toy ID, because here we have access to our entire toy, right? So this is where we add our toy.id. We could also hypothetically make this like just an ID attribute. If you feel uncomfortable with that, just keep in mind that there should only be one ID with the same value. We're just going to use our like data attributes here to create a custom attribute. So we add our data attribute to our button, and then whenever we are handling our button clicks, we grab our toy ID from our button again. So our event target here is our button, so the like button. We're grabbing the toy ID by saying dataset.id.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, Brad, did you have a question too?
Yeah, on lines 34 and 35, any concerns about taking the algorithm of current nums and likes plus 1, is sticking that in the value section of likes colon, and then you do that down
Nope.
there exactly.
Actually, the reason that I did this is because I know that we need to update our front end as well, and we need this like new likes number. So I just kind of created a variable around this because I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be using that later on. But other than that, no particular reason that you'd want to have that. You can just throw that in here directly. Totally fine.
Because by the time it gets into the variable updated toy, it's been made into a single digit. So I was wondering if it was sending like current numbers plus 1 through the JSON stringify, but clearly that's not an issue then. Like if they would get
No,
messed up.
it just gets turned into the value of whatever, like the number that we have. That's not a problem at all. So what, like the variable that we're gonna have here is just gonna have a key of likes and then a value of some kind of number for how many new likes that toy has. Okay. Any other questions here? All right, so this was our last to do here, which is updating our front end. Let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to do that right here because I have a few variables that I'm going to reuse. We could also factor that out into another function. Maybe we can do that later. But yeah, let's update our front end. We're going to do this optimistically because we're not worried about our patch request here. And so what do we need to do? We need, what do we need to do in order to update our front end? I have some window washers going by my window. I think it's pretty weird. Anyway, yeah, what do we need to do? Yeah, in order to update the front end. Go ahead, Noah.
We need to find the tag for the 10 likes or whatever there, the tag that we used before, and just update the text.
Exactly. So we happen to already have this like likes element, which is our p tag with the likes in it. So let's reuse this. And we want to change this is the actual p tag, right? So we want to change what's inside of it. So we want to change the text content and set it equal to something else. Let's just kind of try this out, setting it to something else. If we like, we can see that we are now setting it to a different string. Obviously, we don't want to set it to that. What do we want to set this to?
To the new number of likes and the word likes.
Yep. New num likes. And then we'll just kind of cheat. We're not actually replacing the just the number itself, but the whole thing. It's gonna make our lives a lot easier. We just need this one line of code. But you could hypothetically, you know, take just the likes and replace that, but it'd be a lot harder. This is fine for what we're doing. All right, let's hit the like button a couple of times, and it is updating both our front end as well as our back end. So if we refresh, we still have our likes. Awesome. Let's clean this up a little bit. We don't actually need our response here because we're doing an optimistic render. So let's get rid of those. Again, I was just console logging my updated toy previously. Because we're just doing the optimistic render, we don't need that. We could leave it in, but there's no harm in taking it out. And then other than that, our functionality is pretty much there. Let's walk through our structure a little bit again. So up here we have all of our listeners, right? All of our event listeners. And then we have all of our handlers. So these are the functions that we call whenever an event listener gets triggered. We should and could maybe like factor this out into another function, but I think this is short enough to kind of leave that here for now. So this is handling our like button clicks. This one is handling our toggle button. And then we have our form submit here that deals with creating a new toy. Then we have our fetches. we are fetching a new toy, we're creating a new toy with a post, and then we're updating a toy with our patch right here. And then a couple of DOM manipulation functions down here, which render all of our toy cards, append a single toy, and then this one here creates this kind of structure for our new toy card. Any questions about any of these pieces, the structure that we built here? Any refactoring suggestions?
On fetch for a post request, if we're not adding any .then handling for the response, can you still call .catch on just the fetch request call to respond to an error?
I think so. Yeah, I think if we just if we appended a catch here, that should work. Let's try this
Awesome.
out. Yeah, so at this point, we've pretty much walked through everything through the entire lab. So let's just dive into some additional topics here. I mentioned earlier that I'll talk about this IFI that I had up here. So let's do this real quick. Let's do this first. So we should hit this catch whenever we like don't have our server running. So we're gonna cancel a server here. This is our patch. So if we hit the like button, we are we're not logging anything. Let me see.
I think that was we ran into that before because JavaScript console's just returning an error on its own before anything.
Yeah, I wonder if we have to make sure.
I think the only way to
That
simulate this would be to have something on the other end that simulated an error, which there's not really a way to do unless we did like mimic server call out of the.
I see. Okay, let's see. I just want to try this real quick. I feel like this should work. Okay, so yeah, so if we actually have our first then that returns our response into we call our JSON method on it, then we can call our catch. So this is actually logging the error here.
That's awesome.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, let's get rid of this for now, and then let's start our server again, and let's talk about my to-do up here that I added. What are IFIs? IFI. Right here. It's not coffee. IFI is right. So IFIs stand for immediately invoked function expressions. They are a way to encapsulate your code within a function. The reason that I'm telling you this, you don't actually need to do this, and you're not going to be tested on this or anything. This is just some extra information that I'm giving you. So the reason that I would like to do that here is because I have a lot of variables up here that are global, that are in the global scope at this point. Whenever I have variables that are not within a function, they automatically are within the global scope. Having globally scoped variables is generally not a good idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to use an IFI. Let's take a look at this. In order to wrap our functions, all of our code, inside of another function. This function will be an anonymous function, so we don't need to give it a name. It doesn't need any parameters. It is just a function that all it does is it wraps our other code. The special thing about an IFI is that it is what it stands for. It is immediately invoked. So the way that we can do that is by wrapping our function in parentheses and then calling our function at the very end. So these two parentheses here are actually calling our function. So this right here is the IFI that we want to use, the immediately invoked function expression that we want to use in order to wrap all of our code. So I'm just going to take these last lines of code here, and I'm going to put them all the way to like the end where my code ends. And now everything inside is wrapped inside of an anonymous function that all it does is it wraps my code so that my variables aren't within the global scope anymore. But this is, again, this is immediately invoked. So it really just is a wrapper around my code. It doesn't, I don't need to call this function anywhere else because it's already being called, right? By adding these like parentheses down here. So this is automatically called whenever I load this file, whenever I run this file. Let's try this out just to be sure. This just gives us the exact same functionality as we had before. Is there a question?
Context for using an IIFE would be if you have a much bigger commercial size application. So here, the global scope doesn't make too much of a risk because it's so small, but if you have lots of pieces, this is where you're going to be using the IIFE. Okay.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So say we have another, you know, like more JavaScript.js, and then we also, you know, what we have here is, let's get rid of all of this. Let's create another variable here called addToy, and then in our HTML, we're going to hook up that JavaScript file, more.js. Oh, oops, sorry, wrong one. Is it more.js.js? Right, so we now have 2 JavaScript files loading for our project. And at this point, we have a variable called addToy, and if we didn't have the IIFE here, we'd have the same variable in this file as well. So they're going to probably conflict in some way. This is generally not a good idea. So like Brad said correctly, like once we have like a larger project, that's not just one file, but there might be code somewhere else that could have a similar name, then we should think about encapsulating our code a little bit more.
Is it common to see like entire files, like you just wrap the entirety of index.js IIFE? Is it common to see an entire file doing that?
I think it is if you, especially if you're using something, if you're creating like a module, so that you, let's see, so that if someone else was like using the module, the variables that you create, if you have globally scoped variables, wouldn't pollute your own code, right? So wrapping everything in an IIFE will prevent that from happening because then it's not globally scoped anymore. So I would say it's somewhat common. And now if we use frameworks like React, we don't really have to worry about that too much anymore. But for writing something like a vanilla JavaScript module, then we should think about those things.
Cool.
Okay, that is super cool.
And it's like super easy to use. It doesn't take you a whole lot of time to add this. You can always just kind of do this at the end after you're done with everything else. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You can also, if you go online, you can find the syntax for what an IIFE looks like. This is just the content that goes inside. Again, this is just an anonymous function that gets wrapped in parentheses, and then you call that function at the very end. Any last questions here about any of the code or anything, any concepts you want to go over a little bit more that are not quite clear?
So you could, like if you didn't use defer in this case, you could then wrap that immediately invoked function expression in a DOM content loaded event handler. And it would just run that function on DOM content loaded.
Yeah, so if we had like a DOM content loaded, we could even just kind of wrap all of our code inside of that. Hypothetically, then we wouldn't need the IIFE anymore. If we didn't do that, yeah, we might have like, so we still want to have that inside of our IIFE. So like add event listener, DOM and so on. This is our callback function here. And then at this point, though, we have to think about what we're going to do with our like globally scoped variables that aren't globally scoped anymore, because we can only select elements on the page after the page is already loaded, right? So a lot of these variables, the like functionality of actually selecting something will need to go inside of our add event listener. But because we want to be able to use these variables throughout our application, one thing we could do is we could create our variables up here and like just don't give them a value. We have to make sure obviously that these are lets at that point. And then we can reassign those variables inside of our add event listener so that that way, whenever we are calling, and then we can move this up here too. Whenever we're calling whenever we're using one of our like our form container or something like that, we will have the variable within the scope where we're using it. But because our add event listener at that point will have already run, it will have reassigned this variable so that we can use the actual, we actually have the, you know, the actual node available to us.
Crazy. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So if we use defer, we don't need to change anything.
We don't need to do that. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Let's go back to what we had. Yeah, that's the one thing that it makes it a lot easier if you use defer, or if you move, again, if you move your script tag at the bottom before the end of your body tag, it does the same thing, right? So you can do either one of those, or if you prefer to have your DOM content loaded listener, it just requires a little bit more work. Any other questions? Happy to go into anything that you still want to talk about, since we have a little bit more time. All right, let's do one more question. I know someone has a question. Come on. I'm just gonna like give it to the awkward silence. One more question. Let's do it.
Is there anything else?
But it has to do with MyLab, where it's not updating the backend. So I was
What?
gonna ask that after.
Nathan, you need to get your mic. That's
Yeah. What was that, Nathan?
My question has to do with MyLab, because it's updating on the front end, but it's not updating on the back end. So I was just going to ask that later.
Okay. Yeah, so if you're, I mean, if it's not updating on the back end, then that probably means that you don't have a fetch request hooked up somewhere. Or it's not successfully, the fetch request isn't successfully going through. One way that you can always debug this, by the way, is like check out your network tab, right? And see like what requests you're actually making. If there's something that is that's unsuccessful. So what we get here, right, when we refresh our page, is we're already making a fetch request, which is to toys, that gets a status of 200. This is successful. And we kind of look at make this a little bigger. We can also, look at like what the response here is, if we have any kind of response that's coming back. Same if we hit our like button, we are making another request right here, so we can see our headers, which is our patch status is 200 okay. We can see the preview of what we're getting back. So if, say, our server wasn't running and we did this, we would get, first of all, you see this is red. Well, we're always going to see an error in the console. But in addition to that, we can see that our response here from our server did not go through. And if we like kind of take a look at this, we can see that we have like a connection refused because our server isn't running. We can, take a another look at this. There's not a whole lot more information that we can look into, I guess, here, but we know that we have our request payload. That's interesting. But we know that this was unsuccessful. So check out the network tab if you're not sure about fetch requests. All right, thanks
Yeah,
for that.
I think I got it to
last
work.
question.
Yeah.
Oh, sweet. Awesome. Hal, did you have another question?